All right, so this is the absolute worst time to attend a talk at a conference. You just ate. It's 1:15. You're good for about 10 minutes, and then you start to fall asleep. I know how it goes. So what we're going to do is try and keep you engaged and have a good conversation. So don't think of this as a presentation, more of a conversation, because we have tons of folks that have lots of experience working with all kinds of different people. And I bring my perspective as a physical therapist, and then I'd love to hear your all's as well. Okay, we're good on time. So I don't know how to pronounce this. Someone correct me if I butcher this, because I had a tough time finding the correct pronunciation. How to primum non nocere or nocere? Nocere. Okay, I'm going to butcher it every time, so you all know what I mean. But it means first, do no harm. We're going to talk about that concept. So a little bit about me. The beautiful thing about speaking at this conference is hardly anybody knows who I am, which is a great place to be as a speaker. So I'm a home health physical therapist in Lexington, Kentucky. So I work with people that are considered to be homebound. So they have a considerable and taxing effort to leave their home, is what Medicare would say. But I have a background in fitness in terms of, not anymore, but I have my CSCS, RKC, which is a kettlebell certification, and the CrossFit Level 1 certification. So I kind of had my feet kind of in both areas, and I've really enjoyed kind of getting the different perspectives that brings. I also run Jaros Health, which is a podcast and a community, a big Facebook group of a lot of different healthcare professionals, that people that are like you all, that just want to better serve older adults. So that's been a really great resource for me and many others. So today's talk, want to highlight that website, jaroshealth.com/FAI. You can download the PDF slides, and I'm going to be referencing some different links and studies and whatnot. The links are going to be on that page, and I'll keep that up indefinitely in tomorrow's talk as well, which will be somewhat related to this. We'll have the resources as well. Encourage you all, if you are on Twitter, which I know, are you tweeting right now?
I'm going to.
Okay, I like it. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, please tag Jaros Health. What's the hashtag for the conference? FAI 2019. FAS 2019. Use that. I love these conferences because we get to make some noise, especially with a lot of our peers, and heavily influence how they perceive working with older adults, because in my world, everyone wants to work with the collegiate athlete or the high school athlete or the younger individuals, and I'm trying to really get people to think differently about working with this demographic. So social media is a great way to do that. So tag @Jaros Health and then hashtag FAS2019. So our goal today is to become comfortable with those that make you uncomfortable. I think of the people, this has happened several times in my short career, but raise your hand if you agree. There have been several people where I literally thought if I loaded them with one more pound on a goblet kettlebell squat, I was going to kill them. Literally, they were going to stroke out right in front of me. They were going to, break a boat, or I was literally going to hurt someone. And that creates a lot of fear that influences what we may do with our patients or our clients, or what we may not do with our patients or our clients. So I want us as a group to become comfortable with those folks that really make us uncomfortable when we walk into that room or they walk into our fitness facility, that we think, oh my gosh, okay, this may be a little risky. So what to expect? We're going to look at primum non nocere. Okay, all right. You're the linguist in here. So we're going to do that. We're going to talk about screening. We're going to talk about program development. Not really the nuts and bolts of developing programs, because there's so many resources to talk about numbers and percentages of working off a 1-rep max and all that fun stuff that we love to geek about. We're going to talk about more of the subtleties and the nuances of developing a program. Then assessing your client's response to your interventions, which is very important. And then talk a little bit about scaling, and we'll probably have some fun and move around a little bit at the end, if you all didn't need a heavy lunch. Okay, so first, do no harm. Any physicians in the room? By chance? I bet there's a physician in this conference, and they had to do an oath, the Hippocratic Oath, which that first do no harm is not found in the Hippocratic Oath, but first do no harm has kind of seeped its way, especially into the medical world. when we look at people in the hospital type settings. First, do no harm is something that you'll hear a lot about. And then when physicians go through that white coat ceremony, they do put one hand here to abstain from doing harm. That's something that is very, very important in medical training. But why do we need that? Why do we need physicians to actually take an oath to say they're not going to hurt people? Because they hurt people. It's not that common, but this term iatrogenesis, has anyone heard of this term, or iatrogenic causes, is when, from the Greek, it's brought forth by the healer. Or, as I've heard in other places, when helping hurts. When you're trying to help someone, but you end up hurting them. So this refers to any adverse effects on a person resulting from any activity from a healthcare professional promoting products or services beneficial to health. So that's when I'm trying to help someone, but I end up hurting them instead. And this mainly speaks to the medical world, but I would say me as a physical therapist, fitness professionals, whoever's in this room, this applies to us as well, that there may be some inherent risk to where we could harm someone with our interventions, and we want to make sure that we don't do that. But some common causes that are seen in the medical world, and I'm sure you all have heard your horror stories, where someone may go in for a right knee replacement, for example, and someone takes their Sharpie and they get a little crazy, and the surgeon ends up doing the left knee. Or they're operating and someone happens to leave the cotton gauze in the actual knee capsule, or maybe even a pair of scissors. I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff that can be left behind in surgery that has issues down the road, like infection, that even though that medical team was trying to help, they ended up hurting. That's an iatrogenic cause. This lovely wound is MRSA. Has anyone heard of MRSA before? That is the vein of my existence. I've had so many of my patients, especially during the winter in Kentucky, a lot of people may get sick, they may get pneumonia. They'll go into the hospital where they only have one specific deficit, and then when they're discharged home, boom, they have about 2 or 3 extra diagnoses that were induced from being in the hospital, especially for a long period of time. Infections are just one example. Deconditioning would be another one. This is a big one, polypharmacy. Who is seeing people that has more than 5 medications on their list? It's a big deal. And these have serious side effects that impacts function, impacts performance on some of the balance interventions that you're trying to perform. And this is something that is often brought on by, I wouldn't say one particular healthcare provider, but it's usually several that aren't communicating very well about updating the medication list. So these things are pretty common problems. But first, do no harm. Is that actually something to strive for? And I'm going to focus on the first. Do we want to emphasize and put do no harm at the very top of our priority list as movement professionals, as healthcare professionals? And I love this, the letter to the editor. This was back in 2001. This is a pretty big journal, the American Family Physician. So most primary care docs, if they're a member of that organization, they're going to get this sent to them. And they really challenged that notion, that common theme of first, do no harm. And I'm just going to read this verbatim. The emphasis on helping seems to have been superseded by a more modern notion of avoiding harm. This notion seems influenced by an idealistic, even unrealistic sense of attaining desirable outcomes while avoiding any risk of harm. Shelton, who wrote this, has recently lamented the harm of doing no harm and acknowledges how this concept can actually tie a physician's hands or a physical therapist's hands or a fitness professional's hands. It would be better to embrace the meaning of the original text, which seems to say, try to help your patients or clients when you can, and when you can't, at least try to not make things worse. All that boils down to is everything that we do as movement-based professionals has some risk involved. We could potentially cause harm in some way, shape, or form. Our goal is to not primarily do no harm. Our goal is that the rewards far outweigh the risks. There's always going to be some risk involved. We want the rewards to outweigh that. So we're going to pull an audible. We're going to change the name of this talk to how to help your clients when you can, and when you can't, at least not make things worse. All right? We don't want to make things worse. And I think this is very important, especially whenever we start to talk about strength training, about loading older adults. The risk versus reward equation is something we have to heavily consider. And a lot of times we don't have a lot of objective data, a lot of objective information, and you lean on your experience and hopefully, make a good decision. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So now let's go on to screening. So when you all get a client for the first time, are you all doing any types of screens or tests with them? Raise your hand if you are. Awesome. Throw out some common tests or screens that you're using.
I do
FMS, okay, so tell them about the FMS for those that may not be familiar.
Well, it's the functional movement screen. You could go on for hours.
Yeah, yeah, functional movement screen, 7 movements. There's grading based on those movements, and they're pretty practical functional movements. FMS claims to be predictive of injury in certain populations, which I don't know about that. That's very questionable, but it gives you a good idea of how people are moving when they come to you. Any other ones that you all leverage?
Well, I use our own, like a push-pull,
Yeah.
squat, lunge, hinge,
Okay.
rotation, anti-rotation.
Okay. So,
So it's a little workout. And
Yeah.
through all those movements, modifiable or not, we try to analyze how the person is.
Right. And a lot of those movements are what Cody mentioned this morning at the 11 o'clock sessions, those fundamental human movements, taking a look at those. Any other ones that are a little different?
We use the senior fitness test.
Yep.
The new mobility matters assessment.
Okay.
And we use the short form health survey.
Okay.
Pencil. And confidence scale and balance.
The ABC, the Activities and Balance Confidence Scale.
Generated health style questionnaire we developed.
Awesome. Yeah, so all this is great stuff. What I love about working with older adults, especially in the PT world, and especially because I work with a lot of health insurances, and if I want to get paid for something that I do, I have to justify it with some type of evidence. And when it comes to these screens or even functional measures, compared to any other population, we've got some of the best measures and screens in terms of data to back it up, of why that number is important, what that number actually predicts in terms of risk of falling down the road or loss of functional independence, for example. So we have a lot of screens that at our dispense, and I know it's going to be different for each person in here, but I want you to think critically about what you are screening for, and we're going to go through this. So what is a screen? How would you define that? You can just throw out.
Screen, I think, is, there's a different.
Well, it's a go, no go. It's not a performance test and it's not an assessment that tells you why something's happening.
Exactly. You don't get a why. Go, no go. Are they appropriate for me to work with them? I think is one question. Another thing that I think about is risk stratification. What's the risk of this person potentially falling or having some type of, functional decline? How pertinent or how urgent is, me being able to help this person? A screen can really clue you into that, but it doesn't really tell you why. Like you say, you need an assessment. And in the FMS world, that'd be the SFMA is how they would talk about that. So why should we screen? I think, especially for us, we have such an amazing opportunity to impact someone's functional trajectory, to really impact what their life looks like going forward. We have so many people that come into our doors that they could go one way or the other. If they don't initiate that strength training program or that balance program that you can provide, they may not necessarily be able to stay in their home for much longer. We interact with lots of people that are in this really, really narrow window, and we have a great opportunity to impact their lives. So I think screening is very, very vital. And then what should you screen? There's tons of screens. We'll talk about some of the basics here, especially when we talk about what's the title of our talk now? We don't want to make things worse. So the first one is medical history. So I work with Christina Previtt. She's a physio up in Canada. Cody's met her. She did a podcast and a Facebook Live video about thinking about how to kind of triage people, and especially with medical history. And then Alyssa Kuhn, she's a physio in Columbus, Ohio, that made this graphic. And we're going to walk through some of this. So red light, yellow light, green light. Red light, absolute contraindications. I'm going to read these off. These raise my blood pressure and heart rate because they scare me a little bit. Acute myocardial infarction, ongoing unstable angina, uncontrolled cardiac arrhythmias, active endocarditis, symptomatic severe aortic stenosis, decompensated heart failure, acute pulmonary embolism, blah, 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 blah. You get the list. Who's working with people that have this on their diagnosis list? Maybe one, maybe two. For the most part, a lot of us are not. I would say in the home health arena, I am not. A lot of these, if they have them in their past, they're controlled now. That's why they're at home. That's why they're not in the hospital. I'm showing this to you all to encourage you that there are very, very few situations where exercise is not going to be helpful for people. We can modify it. Yes, some of these people, when we'll talk about the yellow lights, they may not need the very high intensity interval training with super short rest periods and really, just getting after it. They may not need that, but we can get them moving. So these red lights, we're not likely going to see them. So most people that walk into your door, we need and should be getting them in some type of exercise regimen. So relative contraindications, I would probably rewrite that and just say precautions. I think we can definitely get people moving here. So pain or some limiting musculoskeletal deficit, that's where hopefully you have a good physical therapist on your team that you can refer to really address that. And then you go down the list, and it's things that are worrisome, but we're still going to get these people moving to some extent. The resting hypertension. Who's taking blood pressure in here with your clients? I know it's tough if y'all are in group settings. This is a number I know in physical therapy school. You become very fearful of hypertension, high blood pressure. Even when I found someone that had a blood pressure of over 140 over 90, I freaked out. Like, oh my gosh, we can't do anything. We can't walk. You need to sit here. You need to lay down in bed. Literally. And so whenever the blood pressure is up that high, as a home health clinician, I have to call their primary care physician. This has happened to me so many times, it's embarrassing. I call them, and I say, Doc, their blood pressure is 146 over 92. I'm freaking out. And they're like, okay, cool. That's awesome. That's a great blood pressure. It's like, but Doc, it's over 140 over 90. They have hypertension. I don't know if I can do much with them. And then every time, it never fails, every primary care physician that I've ever talked to about blood pressure, what's the one question that they ask? Guess. What was that? Yeah, do they have any symptoms? If they don't have any symptoms, send it. Keep exercising. You may not want to do the high-intensity interval training. You may want to do some low-steady aerobic training that's going to lower blood pressure, but get them moving. I used to freak out about blood pressure, but not anymore. Even my wife, she works in the ER. She'll see well over 200 over 110. They may not even treat that if it's asymptomatic. They'll watch them in the emergency room. They're not going to admit them, but they're just going to observe and make sure it may go back down or just watch those symptoms. So blood pressure. If there's symptoms, you should be concerned. You should be measuring blood pressure. But if you see it over 140 over 90, for example, that's not that big of a deal in reality. So those are the yellow lights. You want to be aware of those yellow lights. You want to adapt your programming to them, but that doesn't mean someone cannot work with you. And then the green lights. I love the green lights because then you can really get after it. Okay, so medical history, we want to screen that. We want to screen vitals. But the group setting, is anyone tracking vitals in the group setting? Yeah, it's tough logistically. I'm mainly a one-on-one in the physical therapy world. I don't know if you could set up some station where people come in and they take their blood pressure. That'd take too much time. But if you are doing one-on-ones or someone that is a little more medically complex, this is something that you want to track to get their resting, and you can also use that to see how they're responding to your interventions. This is just a generic chart. I wouldn't look too much into this, but you can find these numbers easily online. But I would say the most valuable for me when I'm really monitoring exercise and seeing how people are doing is blood pressure, pulse, but a manual pulse to where you're actually able to see their rhythm. Are they in a regular rhythm or is it an arrhythmia? And then oxygen saturation. So pulse ox, does anyone have a pulse ox in their facility? You can get one for like $18, $20 on Amazon now. That will tell you, the oxygen saturation also give you the heart rate as well. Very, very valuable tool to have and very cheap. But the big thing with blood pressure with a lot of folks, especially if they're on lots of medications, polypharmacy is a big deal, is the orthostatic hypotension. Okay, so I'm sure you all may have felt this before. Raise your hand if you've gotten up quickly and you've almost passed out. Yeah, it can happen in young and old, people that are on some type of blood pressure medication or not. But that's basically whenever you stand up, your cardiovascular system responds. Your blood vessels kind of constrict. Your heart rate may beat a little faster. That's to get the blood flow up to your brain. If you're taking a medication that's trying to lower your blood pressure, that can alter that response. So for a lot of folks, especially the ones that I'm working with, this is a very, very common issue, and it often results in a call to the doctor, and they change the dosage on their blood pressure medication. This is something that you all can check. Have them lay down 5 minutes. I would do maybe a couple minutes. Just get them resting. Take their blood pressure. Then you stand. Check it at 1 minute, and then you can check it at 3 minutes. And then if you see a drop, if there's a drop of over 20 on the top and then over 10 on the bottom, then they would be considered to have orthostatic hypotension that's worth addressing, because at some point they may have, they may pass out or have a syncopal episode, if you will. So vitals are big. So they're clinical measurements, specifically pulse rate, temperature, respiration rate, blood pressure, that indicates the state of a patient's essential body functions. But is movement an essential body function? It is. It is. But when you hear vitals, you don't necessarily hear about movement-based vitals. I think FMS, like she mentioned, is doing a great job to bring light to this, but we want to consider this as well. So in the research world, gait speed is a big one. Who's doing gait speed? This will tell you a lot. The 1 meter per second mark is kind of the cutoff point. If someone is walking into your fitness facility, or you walk into their home, or whatever setting you're in, and their gait speed is less than 1 meter per second, that substantially increases their likelihood of potentially having to go to the hospital or having a fall or not being able to maintain their independence in their home. And the data for this is amazing. I don't think I linked this on the resource page, but that white paper, walking speed, is huge. That number alone is very valuable, but also we want to see how people are walking, but even just that gait speed number is going to be very helpful. The senior athlete fitness exam. So Becca Georgie is a physical therapist. She's a researcher that's speaking tomorrow, 9:45 to 10:45, about this. I'm going to be helping her on Sunday, hopefully collect some data with some athletes here at the National Senior Games, and she is creating this exam ultimately because a lot of these athletes are topping out so many of the screens and objective measures that we already have. She's developing a new one, the SAFE. You'll hear about it tomorrow. But something like that could be helpful. Mention the senior fitness test. Is that someone mentioned that? That's a great test to see where people are. The beautiful thing about the senior fitness test is there's lots of normative data about, especially the 6-minute walk test, the 2-minute step, the 8-foot up and go, chair stand. A lot of those, you have a lot of good data to be able to tell where someone is compared to their peers. That will help kind of triage, how urgent is the situation that I really need to serve this person well. So movement vitals. But I want to focus on this because I find this very helpful in my work. Who's heard of the STEADY before? Yeah, this is a really good one. So the CDC puts it, I hate the name. It's Stopping Elderly Accidents, Deaths, and Injuries. Seriously, I mean, it's just like the typical researcher trying to put the acronym together. But the STEADY is great. It has, when you go to this site, I encourage you to do that. It has several PDFs that are patient or client public facing and then provider facing. And the way they've created this is for anyone that's working in even a fitness space or a healthcare space can do this algorithm that I'm about to show you. And they're teaching it to a lot of different healthcare professionals. So we're starting to speak the same language. We're starting to really identify those that are at risk for falling and those that we can really move the needle in terms of improving their functional independence. So falls are a major threat for your patients, blah, blah, blah. A lot of that language, it's not necessarily helpful. But this is the algorithm. So this is all going to be on their website. So the screen starts with questions. Okay, and these questions I find pretty interesting. There's a few key questions here. So, have you fallen in the past year? That's a red flag. Are you worried about falling? Is there a fear of falling? That's another red flag. What was the other one? And then if you feel unsteady. All right, so if they answer 4 or more, then okay, I need to look into this a little further. But even if they answer yes to some of those key questions, have they fell in the past year? Are they afraid of falling? And then do they feel unsteady? Those are people that we really need to shift a lot of our resources and interventions to really improve and really help. And that will key you to really go a little further in depth with some of these functional measures. So timed up and go. Who's heard of the tug? The old tug. Very simple. Say go. They walk 10 feet, turn around, come back and sit. I would say the tug in and of itself, it's a good measure. I'm a big fan of the dual task tug, where you add in that cognitive component, and then you see their numbers increase substantially in terms of it becomes much more difficult for them to perform that tug. But a standard tug is great. If it takes them more than 12 seconds, then based on the data, they're at a pretty high risk of falling, and those are people you really want to make sure that you really focus on improving that score, but their functional independence. The 30-second chair stand test. This is a great one. Who does this or the 5 times? Yeah, 5 times sit to stand. You'll see that a lot. This one will give you a lot of quantitative data in terms of how they perform compared to their peers, but also just to see how they're performing a squat, how they're getting up off a chair, which is a big part of a good quality of life. But this test, we say it so nonchalantly, is very hard. 30 seconds max output of standing and sitting down is not easy whatsoever. And I think about a lot of the patients that I work with, where I may perform 3 or 4 functional measures in a row, and I'll throw in the 30-second chair stand, and then I may try and go right into the the SPPB, the short physical performance battery. That may not be very fair to them, because it really takes a lot out of you. So I feel like we should do it right now, just so we have an idea of what it feels like. We got to work that lunch off. All right, so just scoot back, use your chair. I want you to feel what this is like, because I don't know about you all, but there's so many things that I have my patients do that I don't do myself, which is a big disservice to them. Okay, 30 seconds. So here's how it goes. When I say go, that's when I start the timer, and you count every time you come up. And if they get over, if they get over halfway, then you count that as a stand. Okay? Do we have any good music on cue? Like some get people jacked up for 30 seconds? Sorry, I'm completely I didn't say this to him before the talk, so I'm catching him off guard here. Your choice. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. 30 seconds, up and down, as many times as you can. Ready, set, go. Halfway. Keep it going. Come on.
If we sometimes fight,
all the way up. Lock your hips out.
Doesn't mean we got problems. Ain't always black and white.
Stop. Woo. 31. Well, based on the norms, there are no norms for your age group, but I'd say that's pretty darn good. Was that a little more challenging than what you expected? I mean, you just did eat lunch, so I'll cut you some slack there. But now imagine, a fitness professional or a physical therapist immediately says, okay, now we're going to do a 4-stage balance test, or now we're going to do this, and this. That sucks. And you're probably going to do pretty bad on it. All right. Good work. That was impressive. I got some good footage of that too. So. Okay, 4-stage balance test, very simple. Feet together, semi-tandem, tandem, stand on one foot. You can build this in if you do I always butcher this, the short physical performance battery, or the SPPB. This is a part of that. We're not going to talk about the SPPB today, but that is a great screen. It has a balance component, which has these. It has a 5 times sit to stand, and a gait speed as well. And the data behind that test is pretty awesome. Okay, so based on that, on how they perform in those measures, that's going to say, okay, I need to dig a little deeper. And I would say for our conversation today, this is where you want to have a team. This is where we were talking earlier about knowing a physical therapist. You have a good partnership with a neurologist, you said? A functional neurologist. Just people on your team that you can refer to, especially someone that may specialize in vestibular issues, like vertigo or BPPV, things along those lines. Have a team around you to where when you go through these tests and you say, okay, they're not doing that well, here's some other things that I should probably look at. here's someone that I know can really assess that well, like the vestibular system, for example. So get that team around you, and they can take them through that, and then you'll know your plan of attack from there. So screening, do it. It's important. I think another thing from the business standpoint, you have those functional measures. You test, do your thing for a month or even longer, retest, and be able to show that percentage and change, especially if you can show it on like a graph or a picture or something like that. That speaks loudly to the value that you're providing someone. So being objective about these screens can be helpful for the care that you give, but also the business that you run. Okay, program development. We're not going to talk numbers here. We're going to talk about board games. Who's played Risk? Yeah, that's a special type of person that plays. Settlers of Catan is usually more popular. No? Okay. Yeah? All right. Risk is like you got a case of beer, 8 hours, like you're committed to it. Risk versus, but I love the game because you're always calculating what are you willing to risk or give up to get that piece of land, to get the reward that you're going for. And I view program development the same, or my plan of care is what I'd say in the physical therapy world. It's like a game of risk, but I want my rewards to outweigh the risk, but it's something that I'm always thinking about. But I'm going to share a common story that I work with that you all probably will have heard as well. This is Gary. It's not really Gary, it's just a Google image, but let's say Gary has back pain. Gary goes to see his doctor. Gary's doctor says, okay, here's some medications, see if this works. It doesn't work. He comes back probably 6 to 8 weeks, so the back pain's relatively chronic now. Okay, we'll try some conservative treatment, go to physical therapy. He comes to physical therapy, and then we do our thing. Hopefully, we're able to improve. And then, let's make sure, over time, Gary gets better. Gary, his pain is gone. He doesn't have his radiating symptoms down his leg. He's able to kind of get around and do the things that he did before. And from the physical therapy standpoint, especially an outpatient, that's the point where we say, see ya. You don't have any symptoms, you're pain-free, well, you're back to normal. You're good. But Gary goes home, and then he has to do laundry. Laundry's been piling up. He hasn't been bending over because his back hurts. And he can't do the laundry. He can't pick up a freaking laundry basket. And he has to get the help of his kids. And at that point, he's starting to really question, how good is he? He's pain-free, but where is he at that point? And I think that's where a lot of people, especially from my standpoint, when I discharge people, I'm always encouraging them to get in some type of fitness community. If they like the one-on-one thing, great. But if there is some type of small group class, I'm trying to get them to work with people like you because I know there's so much more to improve on. And this may be where you see someone where they come to you, and let's say it's a 16-pound basket of laundry, which is a lot of laundry. But let's say Gary's max deadlift is only 15 pounds. That's a pretty interesting situation there. I love to call that 1 RM living at or near your 1 rep max, when demands of life are near exceeding one's maximum capacity. And this is not a great place to be, and you may be working with lots of people in that position. Now, when we look at functional trajectories, and it's Gare Bear now because you've been working with them for a while, so you can call them that. But this is just a generic graph of a functional trajectory of someone's functional ability over time. Obviously, it's not going to be smooth. You're going to have lots of ups, lots of downs, lots of circles. I mean, this is just for simplicity's sake. But Gary or Gare Bear, his functional ability is right at that level of functional independence. That's usually where I'm seeing people. And I would say more and more folks that are walking into fitness facilities, because we're doing such a great job of promoting fitness and exercise, are going to see you at that point as well. They may still be community dwelling older adults, but their capacity is very near the demands of their daily life, and that is not a great place to be. That's a low physical reserve. To help you kind of understand what this would feel like, has anyone done, have you tested your 1 rep max, like back squat on a barbell, for example, or like a deadlift, or just lifted really heavy, done something really hard, or a really hard workout? And imagine doing that maybe a few times a day, every day of the week. How would you feel? You'd be trashed. You'd probably have some type of musculoskeletal issue potentially, but you'd just be burnt out and tired. And that's where a lot of these people that I'm working with are. They have that low physical reserve, their 1 rep max living. And I think about, too, with Gary's situation, that may be the moment where he's starting to think, I'm not the person that I used to be. He may still think in his mind that he's still the young lad in the service, but things are changing now. And then the other questions of, what's next for me? Am I going to continue to be able to live in this house? That's something I deal with on a daily basis with my patients. They want to be able to stay in their home. And these questions are very haunting to them. Can they still do the things that they want to do? Can they be a part of their community? And then the big fear is institutionalization or a nursing home or something along those lines. These are common thoughts that are going through their head, often not shared, but it is a very urgent situation. I see it a lot, and I'm encouraging you all to consider you all may be seeing it as well. This keeps going on repeat for some reason. There we go. And even though it's an urgent situation, and I'll speak to the physical therapist here, we find people in this urgent situation. We have weakness, we have deconditioning, and we have stiffness beating at their door, threatening their functional independence, and what do we give them? Freaking hip adductor ball squeezes, or Cheetos here. If you can't see it, that's the lock on the door, and there's a Cheeto there. We're trying to combat very serious issues of weakness, deconditioning, and giving them freaking ball squeezes. Or in the PT world, ankle pumps is a common one. I don't know if you all prescribe ankle pumps. Sorry if you do. But we are constantly underdosing and not addressing or acknowledging the urgency of situation that Gary is in. We have to consider the urgency of that situation. So if that is an urgent situation, I know, and I'm trying to get myself out of the PT brain, but I'd like to know if you all think about this. When I think of loading people, external resistance, kettlebells, trap bars, sandbags, whatever it may be, I often go first to the risk of loading, of can I give them a vertebral fracture, of can I cause pain or injury. I don't know if your all's minds think like that, but I know I do. But I want us, I'm talking to myself, to consider the urgency of this situation, but think about what's at risk if we don't load or if we don't provide care, if we don't push them to the point of adaptation. And for a lot of these folks, it is going to be loaded. It's going to be strength training that's going to be of the utmost priority. But think about the risk if we don't load. And this is where I want you to think. For certain folks, and we'll talk about Gare Bear here, what has greater risk? A risk of functional decline from underdosage in order to ensure safety. In the PT world, that's the ankle pump. Okay? Ankle pump, it's right there. Yeah, working it. Or the risk of perceived threat of injury from performing a dangerous exercise. And in the PT world, we would say a deadlift for older adults, no go. You don't do deadlifts for older adults. They can get vertebral compression fractures. It's not worth it. Which has greater risk? There's not an answer to that question, but there is an answer for each individual client that you're working with. There's risk in underdosage. We don't want to waste time. So how we like to think about, when I say we, Christina Previtt, the PT or physio up in Canada, we teach a course called Modern Management of the Older Adult, and we talk a lot about this, and we talk about the quadrant. This is nothing crazy, but just thinking about risk versus reward. You have risk on the Y, reward on the X. So we have high risk, low reward exercises. To the right, we have high risk, high reward. This laser isn't working. Then bottom left, low risk, low reward, low risk, high reward. You get the gist of that. So for Gare Bear, I would say an ankle pump is a high risk exercise with a very low reward. And the high risk is the sequelae of not dosing appropriately and him continuing to go down that spiral of functional decline. That's a risky exercise to be prescribing for him. Now, for some people, like if I am working, I have a lot of people that may have had a stroke maybe 20 years ago, and they, are bed bound. An ankle pump's great. I mean, it prevents a lot of skin breakdown. It gets the blood flowing. I love ankle pumps for those types of people. That is a low risk, high reward exercise. You all probably aren't going to be seeing anyone that deserves an ankle pump, though. I would say it'd be fair to say that. Now, a trap bar deadlift. Let's say you're working with someone that may have osteoporosis, for example. Their bones are not the strongest. A deadlift, I would not say it's completely contraindicated, but it may be a high risk but a high reward exercise. If they've got great mechanics, and if you use a trap bar, for example, which makes the deadlift a little more squatty, and you load the anterior chain a little bit more, fine, that's great. But it may have some risk. We got someone confirming biases back there. I like it. But then, there are folks where, their mechanics are great, bone health is great. Let's load them up. Low risk, high reward. Let's do some deadlifts, conventional, trap bar, whatever. So that's a quadrant. That's how I like to think about program development, about exercises, and just rethink risk. I think we think about what we could do to that person, but think about the negative sequelae if we don't do, the thing that we know can really help people, and that's to improve function. So some key concepts, though, in terms of program development, especially with people like Gare Bear, is load early and often. If the situation is urgent, we don't want to waste time. And what I love, the reason I fell in love with working with older adults, because I was working with collegiate athletes, is I could get a greater percentage gain in a shorter period of time with older adults than I could collegiate athletes. Because many of the folks I work with, they probably don't exercise, they may never have. And man, if you start to load up a squat or a deadlift pattern, they get strong really quickly. Granted, it's a lot of neuromuscular adaptation, but loading early and often, they will respond. Most people are going to respond really quickly, and we don't want to waste time. We want to get the early W, though. And this is something that I struggle with, especially coming out of school, is I would want to load them up. I would want to do a squat or a deadlift or something along those lines. And they didn't really want to. They didn't enjoy it. It wasn't a great experience. They probably had a lot of muscle soreness afterwards. And I was trying to get them to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do or need to do, honestly, at that point. So get the early W or the early win. How can we create situations where they're going to feel good about themselves, where they'll feel good after the situation, and it'll be viewed as a success, and they actually did something. So get the early W. I can't tell you how many, especially in the PT world, especially in the balance, when we're trying to work on people's balance, we'll put them in these situations where they're going to fail every time. Granted, you want them to be on that edge of failure if you're trying to improve someone's balance, but almost humiliating people in the big kind of physical therapy gym. And that's just not a great experience. I think that really hurts our therapeutic alliance and them continuing to work with us. So get the early W and then make it matter. This is something that, who was here for the 11 o'clock Mark Middleton talk? There was one question. I don't know if it was your question or not. Talking about, it was how do we motivate our clients? How do we get them to buy into the lifestyle that we know would benefit them to exercise? And I think, man, that is the toughest question to answer. I know it's so individualized. But what I love about what I do in the home health setting is that the answer to that was a lot about motivation, what they aspire to do, what they want to be able to do. And in the home health setting, I have a glimpse into their life of the activities they want to be able to do. Usually something with family, with grandkids, be able to go up and down the steps, to be able to get off the toilet without having assistance, things along those lines. And if I can form my plan of care around the things that they actually want to do, that's going to help. Now, and I think this is what he was alluding to, some people they don't care. They don't want to be able to do those things. And I know for me, I can do all I can, but there's some things that I can't change. But make it matter is something I'm constantly thinking about. And I think it's easier with a deadlift and a squat, a loaded carry, for example. We can translate that to real world activities. But I think when we're trying to really focus on balance, that can be tricky when we're putting them in these very interesting situations. But if we can translate our interventions and make a very clear connection between our intervention and what matters to them, that can really help that adherence. Okay. And then optimal over perfect. This is more of my issue, especially coming from more of kind of in the collegiate athletic younger crowd, to where you really dial in on that form, especially a squat and a deadlift before we would load. And if we did have them under load, any bit of knee valgus or any change in spinal position, I was on them like a hawk. But I think we need to go for optimal, not necessarily perfect, because many of our folks don't necessarily have the available range of motion to perform an optimal movement, whatever optimal may be. But we do have some general principles for squat and the deadlift. But let's take the deadlift, for example. A lot of people have mechanical kyphosis that they're not going to be able to keep a straight spine. So does that mean we shouldn't deadlift? Not necessarily. The biggest issue with a deadlift is if you change your spinal position under load. So if someone has some type of rounding of the back or kyphosis, that's okay, but I shouldn't expect them to have that perfect straight up and down posture when performing that movement. So we're looking for optimal within their given range of motion over perfect. Sorry about that. I'm not sure the sequencing here. Okay, so program development. The big thing from that was risk. I really want you all to think about that. Reframing risk. Okay, assessing your client's response to your interventions. 23 minutes left. Y'all are doing great. All right, so I'm going to share an embarrassing story because I don't know anyone in this room, so I don't care at all. So anyone heard of Romney, West Virginia?
Yes.
Really? So I'm a West Virginia boy, and I was working at a nursing. How do you know Romney?
I was born in Kaiser.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, so I was doing Romney and Kaiser with Genesis. It was a skilled nursing facility. So I was in an outpatient clinic. This is the first time I worked in that setting. And I am heavily biased towards strength training of loading people. I loved a good kettlebell. And this was like the first week I was working in Romney, West Virginia, a skilled nursing facility. And I was taking over for this therapist. And I looked at the exercise they've been doing, didn't really see how they correlated to what that person wanted. They weren't necessarily going to correlate to, real world function, just kind of a bunch of random seated exercises. And this person could stand. So all right, let's do some sit to stands. We do sit to stands on the therapy table. It's an elevated surface. And all right, you're doing awesome. Let's load it up. So I got a little dumbbell. It was 2 or 3 pounds. She held it kind of in that front rack position. She did great. It's man, this is going awesome. So let's go heavier. So I give her a 5-pound weight, and she knocked out a set. It was 8. And then we had a 7 or 8 pounder, and then we did a couple sets of that. This is the first day that I saw this person. They had been doing seated Therex, and they didn't even have TheraBand or any type of resistance. So I felt great. They were really encouraged. I go home, come back the next day. She's the first one on my caseload. 7:30 a.m. I go in the room, open the door. She's not there. So usually in the nursing home, it's usually another discipline got to them before you did because you're competing with speech therapy and occupational therapy. So I go to the gym. I didn't see her in the gym. Then I go to the nurse's station. They said she's in the hospital. And that's the moment where you're oh shit, what did I do to this person? I killed her. And they didn't know why. The nurse that was on over the night wasn't there, and their documentation was terrible, so I couldn't look it up. And then we got word later on that day that she hurt her legs, is all that I heard from the nurse. No medical diagnosis whatsoever. She was just put on observation, comes back later that evening, and I found out that she called 911 herself. Didn't even ring the button for the nurse to come in. Called 911, and this is in Romney is 200-300 people, if that. Everybody knows your name. The EMS comes. She goes to the hospital because her thighs hurt. She thought she broke her femurs, and she had freaking muscle soreness. I sent someone to the emergency department for DOMS. Granted, that was a pretty quick onset. But yeah, assessing response. I thought I was doing a great job. She was giving me a thumbs up. I am bringing this story up because to get a favorable response, we need to have a favorable intensity. And we need to be measuring and assessing intensity in order to be able to really assess response. I thought I was doing great. I started on the response piece, but I did not start on assessing her intensity of what would be appropriate for her at that given situation. I just put pedal to the metal and sent her to the hospital. So methods to assess intensity. This is kind of tricky, especially for those in a group setting. In the PT world, we love 1 rep max in the literature, but we never do it. Does anyone use a 1 rep max? for their lifts? Yeah. Hardly anyone that I ever work with that actually works with people does a 1 rep max. But every strength training, like the white paper, Cody mentioned that this morning, the white paper, strength training for older adults, which was written by Dale Avers. It's all 1 rep max based, but we never use that. But there's different ways that we can assess intensity, and we'll go through this relatively quickly due to time. 1 rep max, the gold standard. It is great if you can do some of these lifts, but not very practical. But you can do a sub-max effort. So take this weight, do it as many times as you can, and you can work back from that in terms of predicting their 1 rep max. So I think this is more pertinent to a lot of people that we work with. If you go beyond the 15 rep range, the data gets kind of muddy. So if you stay below the 15 rep range, then you'll be able to relatively calculate that accurately. That is linked on the resource page, that white paper. And I would highly encourage you all to read that. It's a little old now, and she's updating it as we speak, so it should be updated within the year, I think. You can do that sub-max or 1 rep max calculation, correlate that to an RPE, telling them, okay, you did 8 pounds for 10 times, you couldn't do any more. So we would say this is probably a 10 on the 0 out of 10 chart. That's how it feels. So when we're training, let's say if it's someone new, let's start around a 5 or a 6. And then you can take the weight down or adjust the reps, and you want to work in that range. So that can be helpful. But honestly, the longer people are studying this, RPE for most folks is a way to go. So that's the rating of perceived exertion. How does that feel? Was that hard? If it's hard, then let's keep doing it. If it gets easier, let's make it harder. And I know we want to be super calculated. We want to, make things way more complicated than what they need to be. But a good old RPE, OmniRes is a scale that actually uses like a weightlifter. They have one with like TheraBand as well. There's different scales. But I find this a lot easier or translatable than like, look at those faces. I mean, I don't know. But I love the OmniRes. I didn't get to add it to this talk, but there was a paper. Stu Phillips, he's a big guy in the protein synthesis world.
That's how I know about it.
Stu? Yeah. So Stu's the PhD advisor for Christina Previtt, who I teach with. So he was a co-author on a paper that was published this week looking at outcomes of clients when they're trainers or PT. I'm not sure what fitness or movement professional it was, but whether they did a 1 rep max calculation, whether they did reps in reserve, or whether they did RPE. So they looked at how people were progressing their strength training, and what they found is that outcomes were no different. So the people that went on RPE alone, or the rating of perceived exertion, their outcomes were just as good as the trainers or the therapists that were calculating their 1 rep max. So for me, practically, that's very encouraging. So the OmniRes is one scale, is a great way to go. So I would highly encourage you all to be measuring intensity there. But assessing response, yeah. Yep. And you can Google that. This one? Yeah. And that's in the white paper as well. Y'all just need to read the white paper. It is gold. And she says some pretty provocative stuff at the end, talking about underdosage of exercise in older adults is tantamount to malpractice. That's how she finishes her paper. That's a beautiful thing. That's a big problem in my world, in the PT world. Heart rate, you can do as well. I hardly ever use this because every single person I work with is on some type of medication that's not going to allow their heart rate to respond normally. So I would use that with caution. Now, assessing response, obviously observation, self-report. You all know when people are in distress. I mean, we've all seen it. We know when people need to dial back. I would say continue to trust on those senses, but vitals are helpful as well. That pulse ox right there, that $18 machine, is really helpful and can give you an idea of how people are responding. And then RPE. Okay, so RPE is good. Even though it may seem simple, it doesn't mean it's not useful and effective. Okay, scale. Dangerous exercise such as deadlift, squat, and loaded carries. We got 15 minutes left. Y'all are doing great. Has anyone heard this quote before? Yes. I freaking love it. The needs of an Olympic athlete and our grandparents differ by degree, not kind. One is looking for functional dominance, the other for functional competence. So Coach Glassman, creator of the C word CrossFit. I love CrossFit. I know it's not perfect, but I love the direction of that organization now as they are trying to really scale a lot of their programming to reach a broader audience, which I'm a fan of. But differ by degree, not kind. I love that. So how can we change the degree? Be a master of scale, and I think, a lot of us in here are doing this already, but volume is a great way, changing rep schemes, set schemes, reducing volume, changing load. Obviously, we can make it heavier, make it lighter. We can change the position of it. So let's say, I know for a lot of people, like a back-loaded squat, if you have a barbell, that can be a little tough for a lot of older adults versus a front-loaded squat, like with a kettlebell, for example. A goblet kettlebell squat is not that bad for a lot of folks. We can change the position of the load that's going to alter the mechanics and make it more advantageous. Cognitive load is a big one. You all may not work with people that this may be an issue, but I know for me, I have to think about the cognitive load of an exercise, but also the environment. So like PT gyms are really notorious for this, where they're super loud, one-on-one sessions, but let's say someone has early onset dementia or has some type of mild cognitive impairment. Those settings are terrible to try and work with someone. So you have to think, how can I simplify this environment? May take them to the corner or a treatment room or quiet it down, things like that. But we can also ramp up the cognitive load, which we're going to do here in a second. Range of motion. This is a no-brainer. This is the most common factor that I'll use, like with a squat, for example. Start off on a higher surface and then go lower. A deadlift, maybe not pick it up off the ground, but pick it up from an elevated surface. Change the range of motion. There's not great literature with older adults, but with collegiate students of seeing how people respond when they perform partial range of motion squats versus full range of motion squats. And the people that even did 50% of the range of motion of a loaded squat still saw significant improvement in their strength. These are younger folks. I'm going to assume that that's going to be the case for older adults as well. But don't think if you have to reduce the range of motion, it's a waste of time. It's not. Load is good, even if it's a very short range of motion. And then speed. Speed is another one. Cody talked about that this morning, especially with power training, just increasing the speed of that concentric movement or with a squat coming up out of the hole quicker. It can be very helpful for people. So this is something we go through in our course, is just kind of thinking of these functional movements as continuums and where people fall on that continuum and how can we scale that. So the bottom is kind of where we may start people and then we progress the way up. But just think about like a farmer's carry versus a suitcase carry. So a farmer carry, let's say you have 2 kettlebells, and then let's say you do a suitcase, it's 1. Well, I know many of y'all are saying, well, 2 weights is heavier than 1 weight. But a heavy weighted suitcase carry, I would take 2 even weights over a heavy a unilateral weight any day or a suitcase carry. So that's how we can alter load to impact people. We can alter the speed, so maybe make the squat explosive on that concentric movement or coming up out of the hole. Range of motion. Deadlift is a very common one where it can be very challenging for people to go all the way to the ground and pick up heavy weight off the ground. Well, let's make it easier for them and raise the weight up. If it's a barbell, there's several things that you can do. I typically am using kettlebells and doing kind of a sumo kettlebell deadlift, and I'll find the thickest books that they have on the floor and just use that. So those are ways that we can really use these functional movements quickly with people. TheraBand. Yeah, TheraBand. Okay, and then burpees or floor transfers, however you want to call it. Okay, so we're wrapping up here. Let's move around a little bit. Our lunch is digested. So let's go ahead and stand up. So tomorrow I'm talking about falling in love with the floor, talking about floor transfers and things and fear and lots of different stuff. This is going to be a small component of that. But floor transfers or burpees, if you want to call that, are a very vital skill, but there's some different ways that we can break it down, and we're going to do that now. So you need a chair. I would scoot the chair back, and so you want to be in front of the chair. And then just kind of try and get some space. And if it's cramped, that's okay, because, if people have a fall, it's not always in the most ideal place, and so we can adapt. So let's say if we want to reduce range of motion, let's say someone's very fearful of going down on the ground, we can reduce the range of motion just by doing a simple step back, for example, or even going to a half kneeling position. So face your chair. Let's just do a little half kneel. Go down, come up, reducing range of motion. See how that feels? feels like. All right. Yeah, just work it out a little bit. Okay, well, what if we want to alter the load? We'll take a hand away. Just do a lunge. Okay. All right, we're moving here. We're moving. All right, what if we want to increase the range of motion? All right, well, let's go all the way to the ground. All right, so just do the kneel. Just kneel, kind of get down, go all the way to your belly, come up, spread out if you need to. Yep. All the way down. Do it again. Do it a different way. Maybe step back with a different foot. We're just progressing here. We're scaling. We're scaling burpees. Okay. All right. So now you all are looking pretty good. We may want to spread out a little bit more for this next one. Yeah. So let's do a little burpee. Let's just squat down, get your hands on the ground, and maybe kind of walk your feet back, and then come up, and then bring your feet back forward and stand up. Maybe do a couple. Don't puke your lunch. Okay. All right. Now let's do a quicker burpee. All right. So if you all haven't done, I guess I could be up here, huh? Yeah. Good music. So we're not going to do as fast as you can, but hands down, jump your feet back, come down, come back up. All right, so we've increased the range of motion. We've increased the speed. Let's increase the speed a little bit more. So let's do 3 in a row as quick as you can. Come up. Okay. All right, so we got the burpee. All right, so let's say that's the full range of motion, full speed. Now, what if we want to scale it cognitively? Has anyone heard of the Clock Yourself app? Yeah. What is it? You want to tell them? Yeah, Meg Lowry is a physio in Australia. She loves the impact of the brain on movement and whatnot. Oh, don't sit down yet. We're not done. But she's created this to add dual tasking to activities. Okay, so we're just going to do a regular clock yourself, and I'm going to demonstrate this. Clock yourself. Okay, $2. It's a clock. She has a beautiful Australian accent, and she calls out a number, and you step to that number. Very simple. But it's infinitely scalable. I shouldn't say infinitely. You can just do half the clock face. So for my folks that need some type of upper extremity assist, or they use a walker or something like that, you can change the numbers to months. Makes it a little more challenging. You can add different movements, like she does a center touchdown, which you just touch your feet, basically, things like that. So we're just going to do clock yourself, okay? Then we're going to throw in a burpee in a second. All right, so imagine you have a clock around you. All right, we're going to start off 60 steps per minute. This is very easy.
10,
Just step to that number.
11,
Just keep that music down if you don't mind.
7,
Step to the number. Pretend there's a clock around you.
5, 2,
Okay, you get the gist? Very simple. All right, let's ramp up the speed. You just step. You just step. What's that? Well, right now we're doing 1, but you could jump. I mean, I'm just orienting you to this so we can make it really difficult in a second. All right, 90 steps per minute.
9, 1, 12, 2, 5, 11, 4.
Okay, a little harder, right? Okay, 120 steps per minute. Yeah.
6, 5, 10, 9,
Go, go.
3, 1, 7, 11, 8,
Okay.
2.
All right, a little tough. All right. So now let's say I have someone that they can do a burpee, they love it, and let's say we want to increase the cognitive demand because that'd be good for them. We can mix it in with a little clock yourself. So give yourself some room so you can do a burpee. We're going to do a burpee in between each number. All right, and if you don't want to do a full burpee, use furniture, do whatever, scale it to the level that is appropriate for you or that you like. We're going to do 30 steps per minute. So she'll say the number, step to that number, burpee, come up, wait for it, step to the number, okay? We'll do 30 seconds of this, and then we'll sit and we'll be done with the movement part. All right, ready?
8,
Burpee, go.
7,
Step to 7, burpee.
2,
Up quick.
6,
6.
11,
Good. 10 more seconds.
9,
Keep it going.
4,
All right. All right, have a seat. Okay. That's not easy. That's not easy. So that's how we like to think about kind of scaling. That was a quick and dirty way to scale a burpee. We focus more on the scaling up portion. But clock yourself. Check that. I don't think I'll link to that on the resource page, which I can change that after the talk. Okay, so we have 3.5 minutes left. So since this talk is now called How to Help Your Clients When You Can, and when you can't, at least not make things worse, we have to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that our interventions in terms of movement and exercise and load are they're not the only way that we can harm people. And I would say it's probably the least common way that we hurt people. And I would say the most common way is with the words that we use. Mark Middleton, I wasn't here earlier this morning, but I know he kind of spoke to that. We can say some things that we may think are helpful or may try to explain why people feel a certain way, especially related to pain, but we can cause tremendous harm. And this, my friends, is called a nocebo. Nocebo. Not a placebo, where we get a favorable response, but a nocebo. And I want to share this video. This has some choice language in it, so excuse me, not the most professional video in the world, but I feel it demonstrates this point really well of how we need to be very, very careful with our words to not make things worse.
So I've got upper back pain that just seems to last all day long.
So what does a typical day look like for you? It sounds like you're spending a lot of time sitting, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a computer programmer, so I'm pretty much at my desk most of the day.
Well, look at how you're sitting right now. Your posture sucks ass.
What does all that stuff on the imaging results mean?
It means you have the spine of an 80-year-old.
Has it been 30 seconds yet?
Nope, it's only been 15 seconds. If your core is this weak, no wonder your back hurts. Okay, now raise your leg.
Oh, I can't.
Just fire your glute.
I'm trying.
This is why your back hurts. You can't fire your glutes. Yeah. I don't even know where to start here. Your butt's winking at the bottom of the motion. Your knees are going into valgus. This is a train wreck waiting to happen. So every time you squat with shitty form like that, jelly goes out of the discs, you have pain. It's not that complicated.
That's a nocebo. That's going to be a failed therapeutic alliance, and you are one nocebo away from going to the box, kid.
With that weakness, your Q angle, that amount of knee valgus, you might as well schedule your ACL surgery now.
That's a flagrant nocebo. You're out of here. Okay, we get it. Constantly being called out for nocebo this, nocebo that. It's f***ing annoying. But we hope that you'll understand our perspective. We are in the midst of a healthcare epidemic that hinges around these very same narratives that permeate through our cultural models of healthcare. So it's up to us to do better, because we still hear these narratives on a daily basis. Ultimately, we have a ton of compelling evidence and research that shows us not only are a lot of these narratives unsubstantiated, but they can legitimately cause harm in the form of kinesiophobic and fear-avoidant behavior. One of the biggest pieces of backlash that we get is that we're doing all of this calling out, but not providing solutions.
All right,
but that's
we're good.
literally why we created a free form.
Okay. Level Up Initiative. Check them out. Mainly on Instagram. But my colleague, Justin Dunaway, he teaches. Christine and I teach our course, Modern Management of the Older Adult, with the Institute of Clinical Excellence. That's that logo in the top right corner. Justin Dunaway teaches persistent pain management, and I freaking love this quote. Beliefs and expectations are the foundation on which outcomes are built. He speaks to people that have had chronic pain, even acute pain, but how we perceive our body, our situation, if we have hope or no hope, has a significantly large influence on our actual physical outcomes. And we are just now scratching the surface in terms of the research behind that statement. So be careful with your words. Don't make things worse. Recognize the nocebos that you may commonly use with your clients. So takeaways, screen. So we want to stratify risk, we want to determine if people are appropriate to see you, but really capture where people are on that functional trajectory chart and see if they are at risk for a fall or some potential decline, because you can really make their life a whole lot better. Thoughtful programming. Don't think just the numbers and percentages and all that stuff, but think about risk versus reward and how risky it is to not serve people well and give them proper dosage of the beautiful thing that you all do, which is exercise and movement. Become a master of scale through the things we talked about. And then lastly, but I could do 5 hours on this. Do yourself a favor and build positive beliefs and expectations. That's going to have a big impact. Okay, I'm way over my time. Apologies. Thank you all for sticking with me. If you have any questions, we can chat on the side, but I think we should transition to the next talk. Thank you all.